So when you're working with a guitar teacher really supports you in two different ways. The first way is in the long-term planning, the lesson plan. So structuring a series of lessons that take you into a specific direction that allows you to develop a certain skill over time. So that's one way that they support you. And the other way they support you is in critiquing your playing. They spot any mistakes that you make, they spot bad habits before they really start to develop, and they show you better ways of approaching the same phrasing as well. So if you're self-taught, you have to do both of these things yourself. And so what I thought I'd do this week is focus on that second aspect. How do you go about critiquing yourself? How do you go about catching bad habits before they become too ingrained? And so you can really accelerate your development, because the better you get at this, the more quickly you'll improve and the less bad habits you'll develop as well, which you then have to go back and fix, which is a real pain. So what I thought I'd do is choose a phrase that's particularly challenging to me and just drill it, actively work on it as well, and see what kinds of things that I'm focused on when I'm working on a particular phrase. And actually, I find when I'm doing this to me defines the difference between active practice and passive practice. You see, with passive practice, you're just working on the motor skill, but you're not really thinking about it. Maybe you're watching TV or something like that. Whereas when you're performing active practice, not only are you working on that skill, but you're also actively observing yourself working on that skill, and that's the difference. And so really what I thought I'd focus on this week are the different aspects of my playing that I'm focusing on, that I'm observing, and I'm trying to identify any issues and correcting them when I'm performing this kind of active practice. Now the phrase that I thought I'd work on is the one that I just played, which is a minor 7th arpeggio. So it's just this, just working on that over and over again, and in case you don't know it, it's 2 notes on the E string, 1 on the B, 2 on the G, 1 on the D, 2 on the A. It's a shape I've talked about before. And with my right hand I'm doing my usual tremolo, thumb 3rd, 2nd, 1st. And so I put them together into this shape to give me something to work on. Okay. So while I was doing that, what I like to do when I approach a practice session is firstly just warm up, get used to the movement, make sure I can play through it slowly and cleanly. And then I speed up. I pick up the pace up to a speed that I start to make errors. I start to make some basic mistakes, or just mistakes start to introduce themselves. And what I do there is I observe myself on mainly three different levels. And the first one is about how I'm approaching playing the guitar. And what I've found over the years is probably the most important thing to be aware of is tension in your body when you're pushing the pace. It's very easy to start to tense up, for the muscles in your body to start to tighten up, and that really restricts how far you can push things. What you need to do is to back off and relax and stay as relaxed as possible while you're playing the guitar. So when I'm at that speed where I'm starting to push myself, I start to examine my body, if you like, or mentally just test different parts of my body. Is there any tension in my hands while I'm playing it? And then also, crucially, what about the rest of my body? Around the face, for example, forehead, am I tightening my forehead? Am I frowning? Or across my shoulders, are my shoulders relaxed as well? So I'm looking for tension anywhere in my body, and while I'm playing, I'm actively trying to let go of that tension. And sometimes you can while you're playing at the speed that you're working on, and sometimes you can't. And if I can't, I slow down till I'm playing at a pace where I can relax that tension, get rid of that tension, and then I start to pick up the pace again until I'm back at the speed I was before, hopefully without the tension there. So that's one aspect, and I find that that's really important, because I've noticed over the years, when you look at any virtuoso guitar player, they just seem to play so effortlessly because they're playing without any tension in the body as well. And so I find that that's really important to me. The second aspect of my playing that I focus on is mistakes, not surprisingly. I'm listening out for the mistakes that I'm making while I'm playing. And you tend to spot different classes of mistake here. The first one, and probably the most important, especially if you're doing a phrase that's looping like this, is, are you making a mistake around the same area? Is it always when you're crossing the same bunch of strings that you make that mistake? Because if it is, it's really important to address that as soon as possible. Those kinds of mistakes where it's always the same area in the phrase that you're making mistakes, they turn into bad habits if you keep doing it over and over again. The way you get a bad habit is that you have an unwanted behaviour, but you reinforce it by practicing it over and over again. So you need to stop yourself doing that. And so what that entails is just focusing on that phrase, slowing it down, taking it to a place where you're not making that mistake again, and then starting to pick up the speed. And if you do that as soon as possible, it won't turn into a bad habit. So that's one kind of mistake to be really aware of. The other aspect, especially with a looping phrase like this, you can play that, 20 minutes non-stop or whatever, which is great, but that means that you never start and stop the phrase, or you start it and stop it once every 20 minutes, which means initiating the phrase and ending the phrase never gets practiced. And so that's where you start to make mistakes. So again, what you need to do, as well as looping it's good, but you also need to just break it down into little fragments and be mindful of whether you're starting the phrase at full speed, if you see what I mean. What you don't want to do is a run-up. You don't want to start slowly and speed up. You need to be able to establish the speed you want to establish immediately, right at the start of the phrase. And similarly, at the end of the phrase, you need to finish cleanly. So often you'll hit that last note and you'll play a double note, or you'll fluff that last note. So again, you need to think about how you're going to finish the phrase, how you're going to move into the phrase, and how you're going to move out of it, and specifically practice those aspects. And then probably the least important, to my mind anyway, are just sort of micro errors or motor skill errors, which are generally caused by not knowing the phrase very well, because it's something you're practicing. And often these are caused by, when you're first learning a phrase, you know the phrase in your conscious mind. It's your conscious mind that's telling your fingers what to do. And as you practice, that moves into an unconscious motor skill. And in that transition period between moving from a conscious motor skill to an unconscious motor skill, you've got two sides of your mind kind of fighting over control of how you're going to play this phrase, and that generates errors in your playing as well. So it's kind of a fact of life when you're learning to play something fiddly and quick. You're going to make mistakes, and it's kind of how you develop, how you're moving from a conscious approach to an unconscious approach. And actually I find doing these videos affects me the other way, where I normally practice, I'm not in front of a camera normally when I'm practicing, and I'm practicing unconsciously, and then when I demonstrate a phrase on camera, I have to demonstrate it consciously, and then I start making mistakes again, which is kind of irritating, but there you go. And actually you get that as well if you start feeling self-conscious, and you know, when you're performing as well. This is one aspect of stage fright and why you can make mistakes when you're performing as well, when you don't make them in the practice room. But anyway, that aspect is something I'm less worried about, because that's something that you just develop over time. Now, the third aspect of practice that I focus on is the tone of the notes that I'm making. And specifically, what I really focus on is whether the notes are lasting the full duration of the note, so they're not staccato. If my notes are sounding too staccato, that's pointing to one of two different problems, especially when you're playing at speed. The first one is left hand, right hand synchronization. You'll get staccato notes if your left hand is moving on to the next note and your right hand has just started playing the note. So your left hand kills the note and doesn't allow it to ring for the full duration. So if you hear a staccato note, then you know possibly you've got a left hand, right hand synchronization problem. And the way to deal with that is to slow it down again and just try, be aware of left hand, right hand synchronization, and try and make every note last the full duration that it needs to last. So that's the first cause of the staccato notes. The other cause is specifically, I find this with fingerstyle. When you're playing fingerstyle, what happens is you play the note with the fleshy part of your finger, and then so as soon as your fleshy part of your finger touches a string, it kills the string. It stops the string sounding. And then as your finger's moving over the string, if you've got nails, then the nail will clip the string and make the noise. So if you're creating too much of a staccato sound, what you're doing is you're using too much of your finger on the string. And I find, and there may be good reasons for that, because you need to use more finger if you're playing loudly. For example, if you're playing an acoustic guitar, then you just have to hit the strings hard. But when I'm playing the electric guitar, I try and keep a light touch, and I try and just touch with the tip of my finger, or use a minimal amount of finger on the string to try and minimize the amount of dead time. So that's the other cause of staccato notes that I'm listening out for. Also, I'm also listening out for what I call run-on notes. So a run-on note tends to happen when you're moving between two strings. So arpeggios are great, a great way of experimenting or catching yourself with run-on notes. And all a run-on note is where you play one note and then you play the next note and the two notes are sounding together. So those are run-on notes, whereas those are I'm specifically killing the previous note as I'm sounding the next note. So listening out for run-on notes is really important, because again, you need to catch this stuff early, because this turns into a bad habit. And you get it even with scales as well. If you And again, it's a real bad habit. If you fall into that, it can take a while for you to break this habit. So if you catch yourself, if you catch any run-on notes, again, you need to slow down and you need to think about how you're going to control the strings, how you're going to stop the previous note from sounding before you sound the next note. And the other aspect of this is string noise, passive string noise, and you get that. So this is really, how do you control the strings that you're not playing so that they're not contributing the sound, because they'll either contribute either through sympathetic vibrations. The other cause of a passive string noise is just lifting the finger. Just lifting the finger off the string can generate passive string noise. And so you need to be thinking about techniques that control the strings. So when I'm playing this, what you may not be aware of, for example, I've just played that last note, is what my thumb is doing here. My thumb has dropped onto the bottom 5 strings and is controlling 5 of the 6 strings, stopping them sounding, while I'm playing this arpeggio. So, and there's similar tricks here. For example, my finger, as I'm playing that low note, is flat on the other strings as well, so it's controlling those strings as well. So managing passive string noise is really important. So those are the kinds of things that I'm focusing on when I'm doing active practice. And generally in a session, what I'll do is I'll slow myself down to a pace where I've got full control of the phrase that I'm working on, where I can play it smoothly and cleanly, and then I'll speed up to a place where I start creating errors, and I use these active approaches to analyse my playing, see if I can improve my playing, then slow down and then speed up. The other thing I'll do is take lots of breaks while I'm doing this as well. I find that within a particular practice session, I may not feel like I'm making much progress, but if I go away and come back again, for some reason, that little bit of rest makes all the difference. And then finally, you just need a bit of persistence as well when you're doing this. The body doesn't develop linearly, you know, it's the amount of practice you put in does not equate to the amount of improvement you're going to make. Your improvement seems to just happen in fits and starts. You can feel like you're making no progress at all, and then suddenly it's like a dam's burst, and you're suddenly playing at a speed and a fluency that you had no idea that you could do, that you'd never been able to play before. And that's great when that happens. That's really good fun. So anyway, hopefully that was useful for you, and we'll chat next time. Goodbye.